Okay, so moving on. Next, we're going to hear from Brian David Johnson. Brian is the Chief Futurist at the Intel Corporation. How about that for a job title? As a futurist, his charter at Intel is to develop an actionable vision for computing in 2020. And Brian has been pioneering development in artificial intelligence, robotics, and using science fiction as a design tool. I must say, I had the pleasure of talking to Brian at dinner last night, and I have to say that he's probably one of the most annoying people I've ever had to talk to over dinner. But not only does he have one of the coolest jobs I've ever heard of, he's also directed 2 feature films. He's written several short stories and novels, and he's an illustrator and a commissioned painter. I could read out the rest of his biography, but I think it would take us past lunch if I did. So, yes, and not to mention the fact that he, as you may notice, is basically a younger, slightly better-looking version of myself. So, but it's a very, very interesting chap, and he's going to talk to us now about where the lines between science fact and science fiction fall away, and what we can learn from technological innovation and global trends that are affecting our lives at the moment. Please put your hands together for Brian David Johnson.
So good morning, everybody. Yeah, as you can, and unfortunately, we haven't mentioned it, but Scarlett, Thomas is not going to be able to join us today. Unfortunately, she's ill. So I have to say, of course, I'm Brian David Johnson. I am not Scarlett. If you can see here, very obviously I am not Scarlett. Also, as Graham been mentioning, I'm not Graham. Now, when I first met Graham last night, I was like, uh-oh, talk about separated at birth. This is going to be a problem. Here's a quick tip, and there's 2. Number 1, because you might be going through the day, you'll get a bit sleepy, and he'll be on stage, you'll be like, oh, is that Brian David Johnson or Graham? 2 things. Number 1, he has a tie on. I don't have a tie on. I know that's hard. The other one, my ears are much bigger. Much, much bigger than Graham's. So I think, as you can see by the title of my presentation, and also by my slide, I'm going to present a very, very serious presentation to you today. There will be no jokes. There will be no audience participation. I've actually even put some people in there, hopefully, to laugh at the jokes. But actually, here, I'm going to set my timer, because I think what we're going to do is I'm going to talk for a little under an hour, and then we'll certainly take questions. I'm doing the work of both Scarlett and myself today, so it'll be sort of interesting. And then we'll do that, and then I'll be around for the break and all day if you want to chat some more. I'm also happy that, I don't know if you've ever done this, so possibly you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I'm actually from the US. I'm from Intel. I was worried, though, because I saw when Norman was up here speaking, because my computer is up here. And I got thinking, is Norman looking at my email? I mean, I know he's an MP and all, but still, he might be looking at my email. So I'm going to get some water real quick. So as Graham was saying, I work for the Intel Corporation. I am Intel's chief futurist. I'm actually their first futurist and their only futurist. So let's hope I don't muck it up, right? I'm going to explain to you a little bit about that. I'm actually going to show you what the future is going to look like straight away. Very early on, I'm going to show you exactly what it's going to look like. So don't clear out. All the people who cleared out with Norman, they missed it. Norman Schmorman. Anyway. So let me first sort of get to know you guys real quick. So do we have any science fiction fans? Anybody who's bold enough? That's why I love coming to the UK. Yes! You have some of the best science fiction in the world. Okay. First off, and I was going through the delegate list, can we just do a quick hand raise? Who's in high tech? Would you say high tech? Okay, great, great. Who's in medical? Do we have any medical folks? Medical? Where's the nutritionist? Met her last night. Oh, she's not here yet. Okay, finance? No one wants to admit to being in finance? Okay. Real estate? There we go. Government? There we go. Norman's raising his hand outside, I'm sure. Publishing? Media? Any media folks? Good, good. Manufacturing? There we go. I come from a manufacturing company. Very good. HR? Okay. And then here's the last question. Is there anybody here who uses a computer at work? Raise your hand. Because if you're not raising your hand, I'm going to come and talk to you. Remember, I work for Intel. Okay. Great, thank you for that. It actually will apply later on. I wanted to kind of get to know you. Okay, so as Graham said, I'm Intel's futurist. This is sort of me, and that's my Twitter handle if you want. This slide, if you read it really quickly, says I work for a large company and we have a lot of lawyers. Done. Okay. So who am I? I have a dual background in both engineering and in design. It's my job, as Graham was saying, to look really 10 to 15 years out and begin to do models of what it will feel like to be a human 10 to 15 years from now, really how people will act and interact with technology. And although that might sound like a bit of science fiction, it's really not. It's actually quite pragmatic, because at Intel, right, we're the chip company. To make those chips takes about 5 to 10 years. So it's very, very important. It's of vital business importance for Intel to have an understanding today of what people will want to do 10 years from now. And as you'll find as we go through this, and also you'll find in the Q&A, I'm a very annoying futurist because I'm very pragmatic. And what I mean by that is I really can't say, oh, we're all going to have rocket cars and jetpacks in the future. Because it's really my job to come up with these models and then be able to build them. Because if I tell the executives and engineers and planners at Intel that we're going to have rocket packs and jet cars, come 10 years from now, if we don't have rocket packs and jet cars, I don't have a job. So it's very, very important for me to sort of be very sober about where we're going, and it makes me sometimes quite boring. But hopefully you'll see that what I'm doing is really trying to inform and really doing the serious business of building the future. By looking at this picture, you can actually tell everything you need to know about me. Of course, I'm the gent on the left, right, with no hair, big ears, very happy. The one person down there, or the guy down there on the bottom, his name is Arthur. And Arthur was the first robot ever created at the University of Essex Robotics Lab. I do a lot of work at the University of Essex, a lot of work with artificial intelligence and robotics and things like that. But you can tell everything you need to know about me simply pretty much by looking at this picture. And if you haven't figured it out yet, it's pretty much evidenced by the fact that I flew all the way to the UK, took the train down to the University of Essex. You can pretty much tell everything you need to know about me because I flew all that way and got my picture taken with a 20-year-old robot. Rest assured, I'm a geek. I'll just put it out there. You told me who you are, that's who I am. I think you'll see I get very excited about everything science, everything science fiction, and I take quite seriously what I do around sort of doing these models of the future and trying to think about that. And that's really what we're going to get into today. Oh, I also have a secret. As you can see, very serious presentation. As this being WorkTech, I wanted to tell you what my first job was. And it actually was classified for a very long time. But now I can tell you today. And this is actually true. I was a zombie hunter for the US government. Does anybody have any idea? Can they raise their hand if they know what this really means? Because it actually was my job title. Okay. It proves that you're all very young and very hip. Aside from the fact that it's awesome to be able to show a slide that has a chainsaw, a shotgun, and 2 handguns. Long time ago, I did work for the U.S. government where there were these things called personal computers, right, when personal computers first came out. And in my lab, we called them personal computers because we used to joke that one person could lift them up, right? This was back when there were huge mainframes and things like that. And we set up a system, a network, where we were just using personal computers to actually do a network, sort of like networks you all have in your offices and on the internet, but it was the first time we'd done it. And it turns out a long time ago, in the dark days before the internet and before PCs, where it was very cold and boring, people had terminals, right? And they had typewriters, and when they were done, they would shut it off. Well, in a network, if you were working on, say, a word processing application and you shut it off, it would shut off on the machine, but it would stay alive on the network. So you would basically have, you would kill it, but you would have a zombie application. Not such a big deal with one application, but when you had 500 users on 5 applications, 5 days a week doing it, you had all of these zombie applications running on the network. So it used to suck down the network load. Now I know, not terribly exciting, but it was very cool because when I would leave the lab, I used to be able to walk out and go, all right guys, I'm gonna go hunt some zombies. And they go, bye Brian. So that was my first work experience. Sort of set me up for being a futurist, I think. Okay, now, part of my job, or a big bit of my job, is starting to figure out what will the future look like. And that's really what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to model is that what will it feel like to live in the future? How will people act and interact with technology? I'm actually working on the 2019 CPU right now. So we're really literally building these things right now. And so I think it's very important for us to develop a vision of the future. And this is usually the type of vision that we're normally shown, right? When we think about the future, we see it in advertising, we see it in the movies, right? You've got the really good-looking guy, and you've got the really sleek and really posh living room, and you've got the really nice television and the really nice device. And it's all very cool and all very attractive. And when I look at this, I hate this picture. I can't stand it. Now, when I say that, one of the reasons I can say that is this is actually an image that comes from Intel. So it doesn't make me a lot of friends in the marketing and advertising department. But I can't stand this because I think it is intellectually dishonest. If we're really trying to build a vision for what the future could look like, we can't look at this. We can't hold this in our minds as we start to imagine it. Because when I look at this picture, I ask myself, where are the baby toys? Right? I ask myself, where are the pictures? Does this gentleman not have a family? Where are the pillows? Where's the stuff? Where are the things that we surround ourselves with, specifically in our homes, but really anywhere? Where are the things that we surround ourselves with that make us human? I mean, as a designer, that's what I find very, very interesting. And as we begin to think about the future, we have to understand that we're designing a future that's for people, that's for humans. And so it has to comprehend what it means to be human. This doesn't work. So remember, I told you I was going to show you what the future was really going to look like. This awaits you on my next slide. Who would like to see what the future is going to look like? Oh, you're all very polite. Thank you. I was presenting to a bunch of college graduates once, and it was like 600 of them, right? And they're all kids and trying to be cool with them. And I said, who wants to see the future? And it's completely silent, except way up in the back, somebody goes, sure. I was like, that's what you have? You're our future? And all I get is, sure. Okay, hold on to something. Here we go. Bam. There it is. Now, I know, it's great, huh? So, first off, this is a picture taken from some research that we actually did this year in the UK from the social scientists, which I'll tell you about, who are in my lab. But when I look at this future, by the way, from an Intel standpoint, this is an awesome future, right? She's got a laptop, a smartphone, a connected television, and a connected picture frame. So from a device manufacturer, from an Intel standpoint, this is an awesome future, right? And by the way, it's all connected together, and she's watching TV and doing things around entertainment and TV. But when I look at this, the reason why I love it, it is intensely human, right? Look at all the junk on top of the chest of drawers, and the drawer down at the bottom is open, and look, she's in her bare feet. And they're not the most attractive bare feet. And that's okay. I don't have good-looking feet either. By the way, does anybody know her? I always worry about this sometimes, and I'm going to get in trouble because this was actually in the UK. But that's what I really, really like about this. When I look at this, this is the type of future I want to live in. This is the future I want to design, by the way, as well. I want to design for something that is comfortable. I don't want to live in this future, because this future looks like prison. This looks comfortable, right? And you can't see it, unfortunately, but she has a pillow down there, right here. And the pillow says, chill out. Right, so this is, so, and again, all kind of fun aside, really this is the type of world that we try to comprehend, one that is intensely human, and understanding that human beings are very complicated, and this is a good thing. And I think that this not only applies in the design of here, but as we begin to talk about the future of work. All right, so, Mr. Futurist, how do we come up with this? How do we do it? And this is my most boring slide, so we'll get through this very quickly. This is actually how my lab is set up at Intel. My lab is actually run by a cultural anthropologist by the name of Dr. Genevieve Bell. And we've got these 4 areas that are in the lab. First, we have the research side, and the research side is anthropologists and ethnographers who are actually going out and studying people, first and foremost. I mean, imagine that. We're building for people. We're going out and we're studying. We're getting an understanding of human relationships and human behavior before we do anything else. And everything that I do, excuse me, everything that I do is based upon the social science first. So we start with that. And then we say, all right, so once we have an understanding of human relationships and what people are doing, and this is all, again, all around the world, then we go to the technology side. And that's what you would expect from Intel. It's the hardware, the software, the algorithms, all that good stuff. And we sort of say, okay, we have this understanding of the technology, so what can we then do to make those people's lives better? What can we do to make their work more productive? What can we do to capture their imaginations? But always making sure that the technology is being built and designed for people. And then the next group is the design team. And the design team is the human factors engineers and the design researchers who take the social science and the computer science and start banging it together and actually begin to do the design, and then they take it out and they turn it into products. And then you've got sort of my team, which is right there down at the end, and we're the ones who are taking from all of that, taking all the research and actually applying it. And I show you this picture again, and it's something that also just illustrates, let me make sure I'm not running out of time, what illustrates just how geeky I am. So that is actually a painting of mine. So we'll go back here so you can see it. It's bigger, so I'll cop to how geeky I am. So it's a painting that I've done, and it's about 4 feet by 15 feet long. And of course, that's space stations, and the space stations are talking to each other. And they're talking to each other in real binary code. So if you actually typed that into a binary code translator, it would actually say, I am here. Because that's what space stations say to each other, I am here. This, of course, I said to my wife, and she said, yes, honey, fine, that's great. And that's the future casting part. So what future casting is, if you take nothing away from what I'm talking about today, please understand that future casting and what I do is not predictive. I do not make predictions. I will not predict the future. That is completely useless to me, because it is my job not only to have this vision, but then also to be able to build it. And the idea, even intellectually saying that you would make a prediction for the future, you're making the assumption that the future is set, that the future is some fixed point off on the horizon that we're all sort of running to, helpless to do anything about. And that is simply untrue. The future is built every day by the actions of people, and we have control over that. What future casting is really more of a process to begin to develop this actionable idea, to understand what people will want to do, what it'll actually feel like to live in the future, and then use this process to get there, to actually say, all right, we think it's this, let's start to build it, and it'll change over time, but to actually get there. And I always love to bring Mr. Asimov up, because I'm a huge fan of his, and I love his quote that predicting the future is a hopeless, thankless task, with ridicule to begin with and all too often scorn to end with. So why would you ever make a prediction? So in the Q&A, we can have some fun. If you're going to ask me to make a prediction, I refer you to Mr. Asimov. So as a part of this process, we do documentation, right? I work for a manufacturing company, and everything has to be documented. So as I told you before, everything that I do basically gets turned into a specification. That specification then informs the CPUs, right? What we do at Intel is making those chips. Then there's a public side of what I do, and part of this speaking, and we're going to kind of get into this a little bit more, which is called the Tomorrow Project. And the Tomorrow Project really is about sparking conversations about the future. One side of it is me actually having conversations with people about the future, sitting down with superstars and scientists and luminaries and legends, lots of different people, and actually just having conversations about what kind of future they want and what kind of future they don't want. And I have the URL for that later. And then here's some of the, I've written some books, some different books about actually using science fiction as a development tool, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But then also just talking about the future of technology and books like that. And then the other side of the Tomorrow Project is this science fiction based on science fact, which we'll talk a bit more later on, and that's what Scarlett Thomas was so good to actually be a part of the Tomorrow Project. She actually gave us a really, really great story, as I said, which we'll kind of get into later. All right, so let's take a moment really quick, and I want to tell you about what I'm actually working on right now, and talk about what it will feel like to be a human in the year 2021. So as we start talking about the future of work and the future sort of people, what will it be like? And the first thing that I think we need to remember, again, me being from a high-tech company, is that computing, computational power, isn't just for computers anymore. I think most of us in the room came up thinking when I said computing, or I said computer, or I said the internet, you thought of this thing, a laptop. You sort of thought of a computer. Well, this isn't true anymore. And again, I think we've all seen this. Computing has sort of broken out of the PC, and it's found its way into our pockets with these smartphones. It's found its way into our television. It's found its way into our cars, and it's going to be continuing to kind of move throughout our life. So as I begin to talk about computers and computation, I'm much more talking about sort of computational power. And I think it's really interesting how this growth of computational power is actually going to be a great benefit to us. And one of the areas that I've been looking at is, I think what we've all been reading about for a while is sort of this era of big data, right? The area of cloud computing and all of that. And my version of that, again, I take everything from the people's perspective, is what I call the secret life of data. So we're creating so much information about ourselves. We're creating so much sensor information, so much data, and putting it out there that for people, for us, it's going to feel like data has a life of its own. Well, because the fact is, it will have a life of its own. We will send the information out. We will send the ones and zeros out. They will go around. You will have algorithms talking to algorithms, machines talking to machines, algorithms to algorithms, machines, and it's going around and around and around. And then at some point, though, it will come back to us. And we have to remember, and this is what when I talk to the engineers at Intel, and most folks as well, so you have to remember that ones and zeros are meaningless. It's just data zipping around. And the only time it actually has any meaning at all is when it comes back to us. And so that we must remember the context. We must remember that regardless of what we do, and as we're thinking about this, that when it comes back to us, we need to make sure that that data has meaning and have an understanding of what people are going to do with this. Not just crunching the numbers, but what are people going to do with it. The second area that I wanted to tell you about is called the ghost of computing. And this is very much at the heart of Intel, right? Computational power, so creating these devices, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're going to be making smaller chips. They're going to run faster. They're going to be less expensive, smaller and smaller and smaller. And we have all of these devices today, and the question that I've been thinking of is, okay, as computational power gets smaller, what happens when it gets so small that it literally disappears? And there will be instances of this. Literally, it will get so small that it will be in this table. It'll be in the walls. I mean, it's already in some of the lights and in the cooling and heating systems in this building, I'm sure. But as a design challenge, again, as we sort of sit and think about what it would like to use that, we kind of have to ask ourselves, how do we design for that? How do you design for a world where you're surrounded by computational intelligence? What are the applications? How are people going to use it? How, if you've got a sensor and another machine and something that's completely invisible, what will that then be like when it does talk to your smartphone, when you do need to interact with it? And it's a pretty big design challenge. But it's a very, very different world of computing. Again, as we talked before, a lot of us think about the internet and PCs as sort of this laptop. But what happens when you live in an environment of computational intelligence? And it's an interesting sort of way, I think, to get things thinking. But then I learned as I was traveling around, because I do a lot of traveling around, sort of talking to people about the future, I also learned that there's another ghost of computing. One is this sort of specter, where everything is invisible. The other one looks a lot like this. I'm not sure if you can see it too well. It's Jacob Marley from A Christmas Carol, right? It is a ghost that is dragging the chains of all of the previous applications and devices with it. One of the sayings we have in our lab is that TVs don't die, they just move to another room. And we have to remember that, right? We have all these devices, and we're actually going to live in a world where we don't want all of our devices to go away, that we'll have legacy systems. We'll also have legacy software. And as business professionals, you will all understand that you can't just chuck out your previous systems. And that we need to have that comprehension that we could have a future, and in fact we will have a future, where you will have both of these ghosts. And they will be opposing ideas, but they will both exist. And it's a very interesting sort of design challenge. And the last area that I've been working on and looking at is something called the future of fear. I should probably lean in when I say that. The future of fear. My PR, there's nobody from Intel here, right? Awesome. I get in so much trouble when I talk about this. It's great. Literally, I had one of the PR people come up and go, "You're not really going to talk about fear, are you?" And I was like, "Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I'm going to talk about fear." The reason is, fear is an experience of, a negative experience of security and of privacy. As I travel around and talk to people and do a lot of my research, I find out there is a lot of fear. Especially when we start talking about the future and computational systems, there is a lot of anxiety and fear. Fear, and that's what is in this illustration, is sort of the areas of the brain that are activated when we're afraid. Fear is a very bad thing. I mean, fear sells, certainly. Fear gets headlines. Fear helps to pass bills. But fear is not a very good place to be creative from. Not a lot of innovation comes out of being afraid. Most good ideas come out of being sort of comfortable and supported. Also, when you're making technology decisions or even making policy decisions, doing it from fear is really, really destructive. So I kind of am on a sort of one-man mission against fear to kind of talk to people about it. Because what I've found is that typically when I talk to people about their anxieties and fear, which are quite real, I begin to ask them, well, what are you worried about? And as I start to dig into it, I begin to find out that a lot of them are boogeymen. You guys know boogeymen, right? Boogeymen, monsters. And really what that is fear without information. And I've always been struck that as I start to sort of pick away at it, we need to identify what we do need to be afraid of and also what we don't need to be afraid of. I'm struck by the fact that when I talk to a lot of people, they speak about security and privacy as if they are things, right? As if they existed on a periodic table, that you would have sort of carbon and you would have security, as if it is a physical thing. And I think, as we all know, security and privacy are not physical things at all. They're actual social constructs. They're ideas that we create. I mean, the idea of privacy in the UK and in the EU and in China and the US are all very, very different. And I think we need to understand it that way and begin to pick it apart so that we can begin to say, okay, this stuff over here, we really don't need to be afraid of. Let's get some information about that. And then also, let's begin to focus on what we do need to be afraid of and then actually go and build for that. Don't build for the boogeymen. Build for what we actually need to be afraid of. So I'm actually very, very happy to come and talk today. When I got the call inviting me to come, I sort of paused for a moment. I said, well, I think I could talk about the future of work. That would be kind of interesting. I mean, I do that. You know, the models that I'm creating, we can kind of pull that information out of it. But then I started to have fun, and I started thinking, well, all right, let me do some more research. So I actually did some very specific research for coming here and speaking with you today. And it did really an exercise with myself to think about, you know, what if we start thinking about the future of work, realizing that because you're here and spending all day here, you're quite serious about it. I thought it'd be kind of fun and interesting to get you, to take you along the path that I took. And it might be very different than the path that you've taken or the other paths that we'll take today. It was certainly different than how Norman talked about work this morning. And possibly maybe to get some new ideas and get some sort of new ways of thinking about it. So the first way, I want to kind of take you back. Again, remember, we're talking about the year 2020, 2021, big data, the secret life of data. I want to introduce you all to your new employees. Ms. 1 and Mr. 0. Ones and zeros. Now, I know you all are going to be employing these people because you all use computers. And certainly it's not just going to be one, as we know, these are going to be your new employees. Begin to think about them as your employees. This data, right, this idea, data and putting data to work for you and for what you do and for what your employees do and for what the corporations do is only going to become more important. So as they were talking this morning about thinking about the future and thinking about the future of work, I can tell you, literally as Intel's futurist, we are going to have more computational power. We are going to have more data. We are going to have more devices. You will have more connectivity. These are going to happen. I spend most of my time, again, living 10 years in the future, sort of thinking about these things. And this rate of technological change that a lot of folks talk about and actually some people are fearful of and some people are sort of not worried about, I would say to you today, accept it. This is going to happen. This is actually quite a good thing because you can begin to think about data as an employee and think about what do you want it to do for you. Now again, I'm from the high-tech world, not from your world, so I don't exactly know, and maybe we'll talk about that, what you would want it to do for you, but you could put it to work. So your new employees are going to need a new manager. And we're going to play around with this employee thing for just a little bit longer. So you've got the ones and zeros. So your new manager, their new manager, of course, is something called the algorithm. We're getting very geeky here for a minute. Just stick with me. I'm glad that I'm presenting in the morning because you would probably be asleep by now. So an algorithm. So I'm not too highfalutin. What's an algorithm? It's easy. An algorithm is a progressive series of calculations used to process and analyze large data sets. That's it. It's not voodoo, it's not black magic, it's literally just a progressive series of calculations. So you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then you stick out something else. Now, I feel very fortunate because I do have a programming background. As I said, I'm a principal engineer. But I actually also work with the people who are writing these algorithms, and probably in your companies as well. You actually might have these people, or you actually might be these people as well. But I want to kind of demystify it and actually have you as business professionals, as leaders in the future of work, actually shaping the future of work, to think about this algorithm, to think about you've got all of this information about what you do, and this algorithm is what helps you manage that. You know, and like any good manager, the algorithm needs training. And this goes back to the initial question that I had asked you around sort of what you would want it to do for you. So you have all this data, what do you want it to do? And some of this goes back to the secret life of data. And this is something that I'm working on very, very specifically, that as we design these different algorithms and this sort of taking stock of all these large data sets, we need to have an understanding of what people, what your employees, what your business will want to do with that data. And so what I'm working to do is getting more humanity, getting more business savvy requirements actually built into the algorithms. Again, an algorithm is just a series of calculations. And those calculations can be informed by whatever you want. Most of the times now, it's informed by just wanting to get a task done. It's informed by efficiency, by getting it done faster. But like I said, this is not a esoteric exercise in my daily life. Literally, one of the people who I know who's writing that algorithm, her name is Rita. I work with Rita. Rita sits 2 cubes from me. And I go down and talk to Rita, and she's a great computer scientist. She's very good at it. And I get Rita together with the social scientists and actually begin to put more humanity into that algorithm. And think about that for a second. Put more humanity, put more ideas of what we actually want this output to be into that algorithm. Part of it's business savvy, but also part of it is what do we want that end result to be? So let me give you what could be a little scary, but it's not scary, trust me. And this is the first time that I've ever shown this, as I said. And again, if if anybody was from Intel, I would be in so much trouble right now because I actually have written people versus machines. I would get in a lot of trouble, so nobody say anything. And I know you're not recording this at all. It's fine. So let's talk about how people work and how your new employees, these machines, how algorithms work. So people, and if you can't read this down front, it says, people are serial, right? People, even though we like to think of ourselves as multitaskers, the fact of the matter is, I do have bad news for you. We're actually not multitaskers. Neurology shows us we are serial. Now, we might be able to do a lot of those at one time, but you actually are switching. You do one thing at a time. And people are really, really good at that, right? We do a task, we come to an end, we do a task, but come to an end, on and on and on. It's serial, right? It's do something, stop, do something, stop, do something, stop. Machines, on the other hand, are parallel. What they are very good at, if people are good at doing things one after the other, machines are really good at being parallel, doing a whole lot of stuff all at the same time. And even if it's not one machine, especially as we start talking about the secret life of data and cloud computing, you do massive parallel programming. You can do a whole bunch. Now, when I look at this picture, right, one is not better than the other. I actually prefer humans, as I've told you at the beginning of it. But one is not better than the other. We need to begin to think about from how we build our businesses, how we train that algorithm, how we do all of that, that what is best left to the machines, all the calculations and the number crunchings, but also what are people really good at? And making sure that we're striking this kind of balance between the two. And I would argue, and Graham and I were talking last night, I would argue this balance is sort of off. And sometimes it's tilted towards the humans, sometimes it's tilted toward the machines. But I think as we move into this uncertain future, because we certainly have a lot of challenges, we need to make sure that we keep this balance, that both are enabling each other. You know, there are some things, as I said, around being serial that, you know, humans are really good at. Having relationships with people. Healthcare. I know nobody had healthcare, but you all actually use healthcare. I mean, healthcare, very important. Humans, turns out humans like humans. We actually like other people. We're incredibly social. And then there are things, certainly, as the data and the crunching of numbers, which is very important, but these, of course, can feed each other back and forth. And the reason why I sort of bring this up is we need to be cognizant that this is the future that we are moving towards. We're living a little bit in this now, but all of your businesses will be affected by this in the future. And it is up to you to think about how to strike that balance, but also to ask yourselves, again, what do you want it to do? You know, how do you want to set up your business? How do you want to enable people, and how do you want people also to be able to enable those machines? Because you're the ones making those decisions. The machines aren't making the decisions. You are making the decision. Technology doesn't make that decision. The market doesn't make that decision. You make that decision. So one way that we've been using, and this is where I would cue Scarlett. One of the things that we are doing as a part of the Tomorrow Project is to use science fiction as a way to ask those questions. And if you'll permit me for a moment, this idea that the future isn't set and that we do need to be active participants in the future is a huge, huge passion of mine. It's something that most people, when I talk to people, I don't think really understand or really capture the power of it. I was talking to actually a local science fiction author, an activist here by the name of Cory Doctorow. And Cory, we were talking about how you, in the future modeling that I do, how you can have an effect on the future. And really, we got to this really, really lovely point where we said, probably the most powerful thing that you can do is to change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in. Sit with that for a second. I mean, on one hand, it's easy, right? We can give them science fiction, and they can read it, and they can go, oh, okay, that's sort of interesting. And they can say, okay, I'd like to live in that future. Or they can say, well, I wouldn't like to live in that future. And that's really one of the things I think that science fiction is really good at. I mean, I'm a geek, and hopefully I have some fellow geeks here. That science fiction really does give us that language to have a conversation about the future. You may not be a computer scientist or a synthetic biologist or a data architect, doesn't matter. If you have a science fiction story based upon science fact, which is what the Tomorrow Project is doing, science fiction based upon science fact, it gives you a vision of the future and allows you to say, I like this, I don't like that. And it's very fact-based. And the reason why it allows us to do that is good stories, good films, good comics are about people. They're about humans. Good science fiction stories are about humans. They're about people and characters. And really good science fiction stories take technology, and in our case, I think technology that is from the real world, and examines the human impact, examines the cultural impact. It examines the ethical implications and also the business implications. There's a couple different schools here in the UK that are actually teaching my book, Science Fiction Prototyping. Actually, using science, this blew my mind when they emailed me. I was like, are you kidding? Oftentimes in my career, I ask myself, is this wise? They actually said, we're going to use science fiction prototyping as a way to think about business models, to think about the future of business. And I said, is this wise? And they said, well, Brian, you do know that business models and business plans are just fiction, right? Let's be clear. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. That's very good. I'll use that. So again, we need to sort of embrace that again, that we are the ones that are in control. We're the ones who are saying, okay, this is the future that we want to live in, and this is the future that we don't want to live in, and that we're the ones who kind of make that decision. And that's what the Tomorrow Project is all about. And at the end, I'll have the URL, and you can Google it as well if you want to. But we actually have quite a bit of stories. I mean, like I said, Charlotte did a story about sort of human interactions with small devices, and it is very human. In this one, which is the first one we did, there actually is a story which is really fun by Douglas Rushkoff. Doug is a media theorist. He lives in New York City, and it's called The Last Day of Work. It literally looks at what happens when work becomes obsolete. Doug's great because Doug's a troublemaker. I'll warn you, Doug's a troublemaker, but it's really, really fascinating. And it always kind of confounds him because he says, I'm not going to agree with you. I say, this is a good thing. This is what we want. We want these visions of really, really good things, of positive places where things are going, but then also things that we don't want. I mean, we need to have those conversations. And then, perfect, I have 2 more slides. And then the last one over there on the upper right-hand side is the anthology that we just released. We just released it a couple weeks ago, which has a story from Cory Doctorow about what happens when passwords go away. What happens when we live in a world, and literally he writes about it, what are the business implications, the legal implications, and even what will it feel like the day passwords become obsolete. And it's really good, and also they're just cracking good stories as well. So, as I said, I have 2 more slides. I have a question for you, now that you've sort of seen sort of how I work and sort of how we sort of look at the future, and you've now all seen the future. You can actually go home and tell your partners and your children you've seen the future. And hopefully I've given you, or at least convinced you a little bit, that the future really is in your hands. That people, everybody, can affect the future by having a conversation about it. Having a conversation with your family, your coworkers, your government officials, with the media. Having these conversations about what we want and what we don't want are incredibly powerful. Changing the story that we tell ourselves about the future that we will live in has a huge, huge effect on people. But I challenge you actually to think a little bit broader, because as business leaders, as professionals, as people, evidenced by the fact that you are here, that you actually care about the future, I say you don't affect the future, you actually have the ability to build it. You have the ability to have an opinion, to say, this is where I want things to go. Not only just saying this is where I think things are going to go, but this is where I want things to go. Have an opinion in what you do. Don't just sit back and let the market tell you, or this tell you, or that tell you where you're going to go. You have the ability to say, no, I think we should do this. And this could be, for myself, from a personal standpoint, an ethical standpoint, a government standpoint, and certainly from a business standpoint. You have that power. So if the future is in your hands, it's a very simple question. What are you going to do with it? From today forward, especially in this, you have the ability to shape it, and it's all on you. It's actually not about me. It's not actually even about all these speakers. You're the ones ultimately who are going to change it. So I encourage you to please, please have a vision, have an opinion, and then drive towards it. So I have one last slide, and it is the most important slide in the entire deck. I did save the best for last. It takes a little bit of explaining. When I was coming up in industry, I was a speechwriter. I used to write speeches for executives. And I had one executive who, in every presentation, had me put a picture of dogs playing poker. Right, you all know that, right? It's got the bulldog who's got the card in his toe. I love that picture. And I was so young, I didn't ask. I was like, yes, sir, I will put a picture of dogs playing poker in all of your presentations. And I got really good at it, right? If there was a television screen, I'd put the picture of dogs playing poker on the television screen. If there was a picture, a frame on the wall, it would be up there. So every presentation for years and years and years, picture of dogs playing poker. And so at the end of my time with him, I finally got up enough guts as we were parting. I said, sir, I have to ask you, why in every presentation did I have to have a picture of dogs playing poker? And he kind of smirked at me and said, Brian, that's a silly question. People love pictures of dogs playing poker. Why wouldn't you put a picture of dogs playing poker in your presentation? And he was right. It always worked. So I've taken on this mantle. I've taken this on moving forward, but I've changed it a little bit. So in all of my presentations, I make sure not to have a picture of dogs playing poker. I always make sure to have a picture of animals using technology. So the longer you look at this picture, the more freaked out you are going to get. Exactly, right? It just keeps rolling. You're like, wow, that's a cute cat. Wait, that cat's playing. Wait, it's crazy. So with that, I'll say that's my Twitter handle if you want to get in touch with me. I'm going to be around all day. That's the Tomorrow Project if you want to kind of dive in. And we're going to change the website a little bit more so we'll take conversations and have conversations. But most off, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Well, it was a fantastic discussion there. Very reassuring vision of the future, I found, in many ways. I think a picture of the girl on the bed with all the clutter and the laptop that's the kind of future I want to live in. It's the one that appeals to me most. And I think that shows to me that technology, these are the guys who know about these things, and but future technology is going to complement what we already have. That's the way it's going to work best for us. It's not going to take over everything we do. It's going to get the best out of us. So we've got, before we break for coffee in 5 minutes, we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience for Brian. I'm sure there's going to be a few here. So should we start? There's a gentleman at the back waving his hand furiously.
No,
so,
I don't know what Intel's stock price is going to be.
Could you say your name and your company, please?
Yeah, it's Jason Turner from Swanky Hayden Connell Architects. And first of all, first point I wanted to make is I'm a little bit disappointed that yourself and John didn't actually paint yourselves blue in fitting tribute to an Intel famous advert. I think that would have been very appropriate.
That's for the after party.
But my serious question is, when Intel are considering the future, is it a global future? Is it a series of different futures depending on which part of the globe you're in? And how do you reconcile what might be the future for the Middle East, the future for Asia, as well as Western Europe, etc.?
That's a great question. Part of that is really at the core of why we have a lab of social scientists. So we base everything on humans first, and that research, which has been going on now for about 15 years, is global research everywhere. It's not just limited to markets, it's every places that you would expect, but then also we'll go to Africa, and we go to South America, and we go all over. I don't think they've been to Antarctica, but they've pretty much been everywhere. And that's one way. To making sure that it's global is making sure that we're looking at the globe's citizens and comprehending that. Then the other side of it, just as you said, as we start to look at the changes, and this is what I spend a lot of my time doing. I spend most of my time on airplanes, going to different countries, talking to people about the future, and beginning to refine it. Because you're right, the science fiction author William Gibson has a really, really great quote that the future is here, it's just very poorly distributed. And that's one of the things that I actually take on as a professional operating, a way that I operate in the work that I do, is that the future is, there are multiple futures, right? It's not that Not that the future is fixed, and that's not true, but also it's not only not fixed, there's lots of futures. And the future of these devices all connected together in Mumbai looks very, very different than the future of all these devices hooked together in, say, Stockholm, Sweden. And I make sure that in that we're pulling in that information to making sure that the technology and the capabilities are robust enough to understand that, and then I share that. So because I sit 10 years out, I take my specifications and my reports, which are hundreds and hundreds of pages, but they then follow the product throughout the entire step-by-step process, almost even to the fact that if you're buying Intel's products, you actually get my research, and you get all the research that comes along with it. So that hopefully as we're getting there, as it goes to, say, a device manufacturer in Taipei, or a device manufacturer in Japan, or one, say, in Scandinavia, they have that information and at least can begin to comprehend it.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else in the audience? There's a gentleman here and a lady. Let's go to Alison first. Alison Maitland here. And then we'll go to you after this.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alison Maitland, author and journalist. Your photograph of the woman in the bedroom, I mean, it looks very familiar in many ways. It reminds me of my daughters and actually me sometimes too, unfortunately. But I just wondered what your view was about whether it's really a good idea to have sort of constant technology around us, even in the bedroom, because there are people who advise that you should really not have any technology at all in the bedroom in order to be able to have some space for being, you know, totally human without technology, or just actually resting.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alice. That's a great question. You are a great candidate for the future of fear. This is something that there's this anxiety. There really is an anxiety. I sort of feel like now I can be your therapist. Allison, let's talk. No, but you're right. For myself, I view technology as a tool, right? And as a tool, tools can allow us to be and express ourselves to be sometimes more human than we want to be. Sometimes holding the mirror up of who we actually are as people can be rather uncomfortable. I talked to a gentleman once in a setting like this who was talking to me about his daughters and actually was very upset at me specifically that I was stealing his daughters away from him. And they were 13 and 15, so this was worrisome. And he was very upset because of texting and because just as you said, that worry. And I first off said, number one, you're right, which he sort of was like, wait a minute, you're the guy from Intel, you're telling me I'm right. And I'm like, no, that fear that you have is good. That anxiety is good. And the reason why that's good is because you're a good parent. Be a good parent. You're worried about your daughters. Keep doing that. But let's really be clear of what we're talking about. And so I said, let me ask you a question. Are you a family that watches TV while you have dinner? Or are you a family that doesn't watch TV while you have dinner? And he said, oh, we don't watch TV at all. I said, great. That is a decision you make as a father and as a family. The technology, which is the television, doesn't care if it's on or off. You make that decision. And I think with these new devices that you have in that room, they're so new. I mean, these have only been around really for a couple years, and we haven't had the social and cultural conversation around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that's really what we need to do. The devices, you just turn them off. We need to actually, from a parenting standpoint, I think from a media standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, need to have that conversation. And a good example, back to that gentleman later, who I followed up later in email, is somebody else came to me and said, oh yeah, we do this all the time, it's no big deal. I was like, what do you mean? And he said, yeah, we just have screen time at home. That this other gentleman's daughters could use any screen that they wanted, but only for a certain period of time. And then all the screens went off, whether it be television or internet.
Okay, that's great. We're going to take one more question very quickly from this gentleman who's been waiting, and then we're going to go for coffee. Sir?
Thanks. Hi, it's Jim Reed from Arup. I've lived my whole working life for the last, God knows how many years, living in the future, actually, and it's dealing with collaborators and clients like architects and developers and answering their one question, which was, how can I future-proof my project or my building against the future demands of the ever-changing demands of technology? And actually considering a building is going to be there for 50 years and the technology is changing almost daily, as we know, that's been quite a challenge. But the point is, they're not asking that question as much anymore. they're asking a new one, and it actually picks up on what, for me, was the most important point that you made. And the new question is, what do we do with all this data? And I think the challenge for us in the future, and you can comment on this, is not about technology. The technology is way ahead of us, and it's leaning back over its shoulder saying, come on, what do you want to do? It's us actually adapting to that change and deciding what we want to do with all that data.
Yeah, and he's not a plant, by the way, but I've actually studied quite a bit. And they're doing incredible work with data. And I do think that it is about having that opinion, having that vision of what you want to do. Because really, we're at a point with computational power and with data is that it's going to be hard-pressed to ask it to do something, to put out these, to create programs, to do the algorithms, to get devices, and not actually have it be able to react and be able to do things with you. So I do agree that it's very, very important that we sort of take control of that and sort of own up to the fact that, yes, we do have the ability to harness all of this, and we need to challenge ourselves to then go further, to actually do even more.
Okay, great. We're going to wrap that up now and go for a break for coffee. Can I just say thank you very much to Brian again. A really interesting discussion. So Brian loves talking about this stuff forever, so go and find him at the coffee break, and if you want to talk any more about it. We're going to come back at 11:10 sharp, please. The coffee is going to be served in zones 2 and 4 out there, so make your way to zones 2 and 4, and be back at 11:10. Thank you.